Welcome back to this week's Car-Pinionated. I'm joined by Geoff Danker, who is a writer and editor from WBBM Radio in Chicago, and Glenn Packman, who is a noted denizen of Wilton, Connecticut. Welcome, guys. What I wanted to talk to you about this week is the UAW and their recent strike against the manufacturers and how that plays out over time. Geoff, you're in Chicago. You're closer to Detroit than we are. What have you seen that maybe we haven't seen out here on the coast about how this strike will mean, what this will mean going forward?
So we're already seeing some evidence that this contract that the UAW negotiated with the Detroit Three is having it's having effects outside of those three car makers. A number of the non-union companies that have plants in the U.S. are now giving raises to their workers in an event to forestall probably the plans by the president of the UAW, Shawn Fain, to start organizing more of those plants. Indeed, the president a couple of weeks ago was actually in Illinois meeting with folks at the Stellantis plant in the town of Belvidere, which has been closed and now is set to reopen under the deal, and had said publicly, I want to see every plant in America getting a deal like this, and I think Shawn Fain has a plan for that. So a lot of those car makers, your Toyotas, your Hyundais, are now increasing wages for their workers, probably to keep them from getting organized by the UAW. The other thing we're seeing is that the car makers are starting to make shifts in their own spending to account for what they say are the costs of the deal. Stellantis just offered a buyout a week ago to several thousand of its workers, in part to deal with the costs of the new contract and also sort of changes in the business. And that may have something to do with the fact that I think Stellantis sells 4 cars in the U.S. that aren't Jeeps. But that's a whole other thing aside. This was really remarkable in many ways that were documented as it was happening. This was a strike unlike any other that the union had ever attempted. The UAW had never hit all 3 automakers at once in different places. The archetype for years was they would pick one automaker, usually the one that was doing the best, as their strike target. They would throw everything at that. They would get the deal at whatever car maker that was, and then they would take it to the other car makers and say, okay, what can you do for us? This time around, they were far more nimble in terms of how they handled it. And I think that one of the byproducts of this strike and the agreement and the way that the UAW, I have to say, expertly messaged what it was doing, to the extent that most people in the country seem to be on their side. I think that this is going to change how a lot of businesses respond to organized labor. The contract isn't perfect, but from a UAW standpoint, it's awfully generous. It is the best deal they've gotten in a long time, at a time when changes in how cars are being made and powered could mean wholesale changes in labor, in how much labor is required to build a car.
Yeah, right. And I think you're right about how the union is perceived, and I think you take this strike and a completely different industry and everything, the actors strike and the writers strike. I think all those three things combined sort of make this like, there's like, they talked all that our union's dead, our union, and I think that there's a big comeback here
And you see it,
in union.
it's not just, and you're absolutely right. Actors and writers, we were 24 hours away from a UPS strike this year,
Yep.
which just got headed off, and they finally get air conditioning in their trucks.
Yeah.
Like I learned this year, they don't have aircon in their trucks, which is crazy. And even down to like local Starbucks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the year of the union in a way.
Glenn, what are your thoughts on the finishing up of the strike, of the settlement?
Well, kudos to Geoff, because I think he put parentheses around that really beautifully. And I have to agree with everything he said. A lot of this is going to come down to people being pro-union or not pro-union. And just my personal predilection is to side on the side of the worker, just because I've been more on that side than I've been on the management side, but I think you touched on something very, very, very important, in that the way we put product together, writing, acting, cars, coffee, it goes on and on and on. All of it is in such a state of flux right now. It's very, very drastically and very radically, and to not expect change in the way these things are made from a human standpoint, from the people that work, is ignorant. I think the UAW did a brilliant job at framing this. They did a good job of making it look like what was needed was really, really, really needed, because it was. So, I just think props to them for hitting all three automakers all at the same time. It's like, when I realized that was happening, I was like, wow, that's big. It's very big, and it should be big, because we're really on the verge of doing things differently. We're on a cusp of a lot of things right now, and to say that we're not is ignorance. So,
and also, and Glenn, to your point about changing the way things get made and how people make things, we're also 3.5 years into a pandemic that has also really reset people's relationships with their employers.
Absolutely.
And that, I think, is one of the big factors that maybe isn't getting talked about a lot when we talk about job action at the UAW, job actions with the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA. Obviously, AI, other issues are huge and deserve mention. But a lot of people spent a year cut off from their employers and realizing that maybe my life is more important or worth more than my coworker or my colleagues and my employers think it is.
Right.
That can't be discounted either.
Not at all. Not at all.
And it's interesting, out of those 4, if you count the UPS, those job skills, outside of the writers, all those people had to show up during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And they were, on the line for, Starbucks too, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to see that kind of shift in priority of the working people, it taking precedent and winning sometimes. It's a great thing. It's a great thing.
And it one of the things that the UAW strategy did was it turned it into a broader sort of class warfare thing. I mean, when was the last time you saw a union president wearing an Eat the Rich sweatshirt during a briefing? But Sean Fain did that, and it worked. Yeah. And for as much as the car industry executives tried to suggest that it would cost them billions of dollars to make this contract work. And I think that generally speaking, the car makers it seems like they were bargaining in good faith. All Sean had to do was point at the scoreboard, and the scoreboard here is the bottom line and the billions of dollars that the automakers have made over the years. It reminds me a little bit, as I'm talking about it, about the lead up to the auto industry bailout in late 2007 and 2008, and the waning moments of the George W. Bush administration, when General Motors and Chrysler went to Capitol Hill for assistance, and they all flew private jets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the optics were wrong on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this time, once again, the automakers got outplayed in the optics game, and this time it was by the UAW.
All right. Mm-hmm.
And it's the other interesting thing is, like, I don't know if the anti-union folks, of which there are legion, appreciate what has happened here. They're just against the union, against the union, against the union, no matter what. And now, does this victory play out in that regard? I think there's probably people who really feel very strongly at Subaru plant in Lafayette, Indiana, as to what they're doing, but may not feel like they want to have a union. But here's like proof positive how the whole process works.
And part of it, I mean, on one hand, some of those workers are probably going to get a raise out of this deal anyway, as that company tries to forestall any union organizing. But what happens when, with every time that one of the car makers going forward will say, hey, we're offering a buyout to X number of thousands of people or hundreds of people, we're not going to bring this car back, we're going to pull back on this thing. People who are against this deal are going to point to it and say, see, this is what the union is doing. It's taking away people's jobs, it's taking away whatever. And there is a case to be made for employers trying to limit costs, because their job is to maximize shareholder value, which this isn't, right? And so you do that by staying flexible and by dictating as many terms as you can in terms of your workplace arrangements and that sort of thing. Problem is that after 40 some odd years of American tax policy that has led to a growth in the number of millionaires and an expansion of the gap between the richest and the not richest Americans, something had to give. Something was going to push back, especially, as I suggest, after 3.5 years of a pandemic, where a lot of people were told, we don't care if you're concerned, you need to come to work.
And that's what's happening now. With all those people who got used to being home are now being told to come in. No, it's I know what we said 3 years ago, but it's an interesting dynamic. All right.
So when we say car-pinionated, we actually mean macroeconomic pinionated. I'm just checking.
There you go. Tackling the fringe of politics opinion.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's all connected,
Exactly.
It really is. It really is.
It's the level of conversation in this episode, these episodes that we're recording now is much higher than normally. Like, well, I really like that. I don't like that.
Hey, there's a lot of people who are poo-poo union, and they're ruining the world and everything. Well, then let's open up more auto trade from China, where they definitely do not have unions. On a cheap car where people are working without unions looking out for them, buy a Chinese product. There it is. It's going to be inexpensive, and there's something to be said there. I mean, so many people are so bunched up about buy American, but then they don't really want American workers to be represented. That's a problem. That's a problem. So
Yeah.
I'm talking about something very basic and a little bit different here, but so look me up at www. Guy with a bad idea, little big mouth.
.edu.
Yeah, .edu. There you go. Which is so much sexier than .org.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right. We'll bring another episode of Car-Pinionated to a close. We will be back next week. Good night, everyone.